Hello and welcome. I am Katherine Krupka, Executive Director of the Energy Medicine Professional Association and your host for this edition of Energy Magazine's exclusive author interviews. I am very excited today to be speaking with our recent author and medical intuitive, Wendie Cotler. Wendie is basically a modern pioneer in her field, having practiced medical intuition professionally for more than 20 years. She's the founder and CEO of The Practical Path, which is her company through which she offers intuitive development programs to clinical health professionals, complementary and alternative practitioners, and to anyone who's interested. Wendie's spoken and been an instructor at some of the premier integrative health centers in the US and is also the author of a new book called Essentials of Medical Intuition, a Visionary Path to Wellness. Wendie, welcome. It is such a joy to be speaking with you today.
Catherine, thank you so much for having me. It is absolutely my pleasure.
Yay! I know we already chatted for just a couple minutes. I know we could do this all day. I'd love to dive right in and ask you way back when you began working as a medical intuitive, it wasn't even really talked about. And when it was, I remember it being kind of like hush hush and, don't say it too loud kind of thing, right? Now it's kind of all the rage. I hear the term a lot, and I also hear it being used in different ways, kind of meaning different things. So I love as we get started for you to give us what is your definition of medical intuition and tell us a little about how it's so helpful for people.
Yeah, great question. And yes, we have a lot of interest in the 20 years I've been doing this work. It's really over in the last, I would say, 5 or 6 years that we've seen a big resurgence in the idea of medical intuition. How I define medical intuition is that it is an intuitive assessment, an observation, and evaluation skill. And I consider it foundational to all healthcare practices, from conventional allopathic to, as you said, complementary alternative and beyond. It really supports all kinds of healthcare. The other thing I'd like to say about what it isn't, because I think that's an important part of our definition, it isn't a treatment. It isn't a modality. It is not an intervention. It is literally something that we scan, we look, we see, and we report to the client. And that information can be taken to the client's healthcare provider for more.
That's a really important distinction, both particularly really about the distinction between it being an assessment and an observation versus being an intervention or a treatment. I'm also hearing you talk about using it with a medical practitioner. And tell me a little bit about what your experience has been of people taking this to their medical doctors.
Well, a lot of corroboration, which is really wonderful. Medical intuitives, the way I use medical intuition, the way I train people in medical intuition, is to look at two things. Number one, we're going to start by looking at the biofield. That's our foundational look. The first thing I teach, meaning the chakra system, the auric field. There's so much that's being held in that area. And then we look also, and this is where the medical intuition part comes in, is at the physical body, the anatomy and the physiology, and even the pathology, like what's going wrong here, what's not working. Very important to look at that. All of that is a very deep well of data for and information, as I said, for the client so that they have more information on what's going on for them, why it's happening, how it can shift. So we're also looking at what the body's asking for. Does the body want this or that or the other? Now, not from my own body of knowledge, but directly from the body. So it's a conversation with the client's biofield, with the client's physical body, not with a client, but so that they can understand what their body wants and their energy wants.
I have so many questions. Um, what I'd like to ask next, though, is how you came to be a medical intuitive yourself, whether it was something you feel you were born with or something that you learned, and in your own path, what led you to create the practical path and to really reach out to be able to share this with other people.
Yeah, thank you for that. I started out in energy healing like many people. And in my practice of energy healing, what I noticed, Catherine, is that some people would come back again and again, unable to release something, right? And this is very common. It's common in any kind of, you know, wellness situation where something is really sticky. And um, I had over the years, and I'll go back a little further. I was always an intuitive kid. I always had intuitive, skills and abilities, and I developed them over the years. And one of the things I found that's not uncommon in energy healing is we get these hits, right? And we go, "Oh, something about your mother," or something about this, right? And they kind of come, and sometimes they come, and sometimes they don't, and all the rest of that. But I had developed my own intuition to the point where I was getting a lot of hits, but I noticed that even the hits, sometimes they worked and sometimes they didn't with the client's energy. So what I decided, what I was going to do was to see if I could scan just for information and not for healing, right? Not so that I'm not affecting anything. I'm just looking, and I'm going to query the body, and I'm going to query the energy, and I'm going to find out about life history. I'm going to find out why something is not releasing, right? That was really the motivation. Why is this person not healing? That process of only looking and seeing and observing and assessing ended up being so powerful and so useful to the client that they were able to release things on an even deeper level than they would have just on my table with an energy healing. So that became what I call the medical intuitive assessment. And that really started the whole thing 20 years ago, a little over 20 years now. And I would get these calls from doctors going, don't tell anyone we're talking here, but can you look at my patient? I'm like, yes. And it really brought that value of what this skill is home. I'll give you a quote, my favorite quote by Dr. Dean Ornish, and it is, "Awareness is the first step in healing." And that's what medical intuition offers. It offers awareness. It offers a deeper understanding of what's going on. We can see these connections in the body and the physiology and the energy and the life history that conventional medicine and even complementary and alternative to some degree don't get to. Everybody wants to get there, but medical intuition really does get there.
Do you find, I'm really fascinated by this idea of information and what you're gleaning and the ways that it can be used by a practitioner who then gets involved or by the person themselves. And I wonder, because I see sometimes in my own practice where sometimes just knowing something already begins to create a shift, even if I'm not intending to intervene or to, I can't use the word treat, or but if I'm not intervening or doing healing in some way, but just the information already creates something new for that person. Tell me what your experience is with that. Do you see that
Oh,
with your work?
100%. In the book, I've written a little bit about that. There's a lot more to write about that. But we work with this in the program from the beginning. I call it permission for wellness, meaning where is someone's permission at that moment and can it raise? This is a big question for the energy in the body. So if I'm looking at your liver, for example, and it looks like it's really toxic and but I'm not saying your liver is. I'm just saying if I'm looking at a liver, and it's like showing me all kinds of things and it's telling me all kinds, I'm like getting a lot of information about what's going on and how it can heal and shift. No, I've lost my train of thought. The question was
Information. What can be
information.
affected? The information.
Yes, that information, thank you. That information is important. Also what the liver wants. That's really important. What is this liver asking for? Because only the liver can tell us that, right? And only your liver can tell me that for you, not 20 people's livers, right? They're all going to be a different story. So what I can do is give that information to the client. They take it to their primary healthcare provider, whoever they go for their healthcare, and that information informs the physician or the doctor or the whoever that is to that information is so incredibly valuable. So what you asked me earlier, how is it? Well, corroboration is everything, right? That's what the empirical data is all about. And so when I hear back from a client, I took this to my doctor and she did 5 other tests and we found the problem. I mean, that to me is a major win. And that is what we look for. Because I'll tell you why.
Tell us why.
Because for all the wonderful I don't have any bias against any kind of healthcare.
Of
Conventional
course, yeah.
medicine is
There's a
life
place
saving.
for everything.
Yeah, and it's life-saving and we need it, and also complementary integrative alternative is incredibly important. So what medical intuitives can do without any prior knowledge of any of these things, intuitively see what the body is asking for, and that can be brought to the correct practitioner. Much of the time, the recommendations the body wants is, I want Chinese medicine. I want, this might work really well. It's resonating with that. Well, who's going to ask that question, right? A medical intuitive is going to ask that question of the liver. Okay, what is it you want? What's going on here, right? It's very detailed and it's very specific to everyone's own anatomy.
Well, that brings me actually to another question I wanted to ask, which is one of the things I think a lot of us in the alternative or energy field see is clients who've been to, I've seen a stack of papers like this, right? Been to a lot of different specialists of a variety of sorts. Um, and no one's gotten the thing. But what I'm imagining happens for you with medical intuition is that in addition to this very specific information from someone's liver, for instance, you're also probably able to see a bigger picture, right?
Exactly.
There aren't really generalists much of anywhere anymore, but you are a
Correct.
generalist not even for the body or with the body and even beyond. So probably the mind, probably the spirit, maybe all kinds of other things. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a beautiful explanation, Catherine, and I appreciate that. That's exactly right. Medical intuition, the way, and again, there's so many kinds of medical intuition out there. I can only speak to my my version of it, but the way I work with it is that I am not here to put anyone through an algorithmic, tunnel, a box. That's the opposite. So when I say there's no bias involved, I mean that from every perspective. It's not. Let me give you the premise here.
Mhm.
Medical intuition holds as a premise that the body and the biofield hold and store not only physical information, which they do, but also emotional, mental, spiritual information, life history, early traumatic life experience, epigenetic experience. You want to go there? Past life experience. It's kind of endless what our energy can hold. Our chakra system's like a filing cabinet, right? And our bodies hang on to things. They really store things that can be triggered by some pattern that has been created over time. So, this is what I teach in terms of how to look at what's going on, how to interpret it, how to impart that information to the client so that it's useful. So, they have a path, a roadmap, if you will, to help. Just like you, I've had clients who've been through the mill. And, the worst thing anyone can hear when they're dealing with a health issue is, we can't do anything for you, right? Doctors will say that. It's devastating. Think back, and even now, Lyme disease, not well diagnosed or treated, uh, Epstein-Barr, chronic fatigue, gut health. I mean, there's a myriad of issues that people suffer with that, they get to the end of the road with their conventional medicine doctor, and that is a shame. So when that happens, generally speaking, they'll call a medical intuitive and say, "What do you see?" And we'll say what we see. We'll say whatever there is to see and whatever can be done about it.
That's just extraordinary and so beautiful to think about such a well-rounded perspective and such really a whole, such a complete body of information and body's kind of a pun there, actually, right? Because it's about the body, but so much more than just the physical body. That's
Yeah.
really remarkable. I'd love to ask, because I know obviously doing this for 20 years, you've probably had some extraordinary cases. Maybe you could tell us a story of a case where this whole, broader body of information really came into play.
I'd be happy to. And when people ask me this, the case I usually talk about really does have that whole big picture, and it shows how the body will store things forever and what that means to the client. Now, this wasn't like a major health issue. This was a client who had excuse me, I was going to say tinnitus. That's not the right word. Tendinitis in her wrist. And she'd had it for about a month. It wasn't going away. It was persistent. Now, tendinitis is persistent. It's one of those inflammations that takes a while to calm down.
Yeah.
But she asked me to look at it, and I said, "Sure, let's find out what's going on." And the way I look at the body is very much like an MRI, actually more like a functional MRI because I can see it working. Um, so what I looked at when I saw her wrist, I saw the tendons were inflamed. Underneath the tendons, though, what showed up was a scar in the bone, like a fracture that had healed. And that fracture was really interesting to me. All around her wrist, I also saw a cloud of grief and heartbreak and emotion. It was very intense, just being stored. Remember, that just stores everything. So the next thing I do is I have a conversation with the body and I say, well, show me where this began. What's going on here? And it's like watching a little movie of someone's life, right? It just shows me these images. And I use the visual sense, as you can hear in my words, not the feeling sense and not other senses, but really I want to see what's going on there. And what I saw was an image of her in her 20s playing tennis with her boyfriend. This is about 20 years prior. She swung her racket, she tripped and fell, broke that wrist right there at that fracture I saw. And the next thing her wrist showed me was her in the ER with her boyfriend, and he broke up with her in the ER right there, right? So I know, heartbreaking. Well, what her wrist was doing
Heart
is
and
that
wrist broken.
and wrist breaking. So there was trauma in both areas. There was physical trauma, emotional trauma. It stuck essentially. It was right there. And that's what the wrist was showing me. And this, when I impart information, sometimes clients have these aha moments, as you mentioned. Their permission kind of, they go, ooh. Um, she said, I remember that incident. And then she said, you know what? My partner of 10 years broke up with me a month ago, just before the tendinitis flared up. And that was the connection in her wrist at that moment. And it really made sense to her. And that was everything her body was showing her. And there was another incident from her life that her wrist said, look at this one now. And what it was her at 5 years old, holding that same wrist for protection right up here, a cane striking her right here. She was in what looked like a dark closet. Before I could go further, she also remembered this and she said, my mother was mentally ill. She used to beat me with her cane and lock me in a closet. Now, that is intense childhood trauma. So, what had happened for her was her wrist was not only holding this current issue that was 20 years old that triggered again, but also 5 years old and numerous incidents in her life with that same spot in her body that was holding all of this intensity. Now that's how the body holds things. The next piece of this is to find out what the body wants to heal, right? What are you asking for, wrist? Does she need more ice? Does she need to see her acupuncture? It's like, what does it want? So these kinds of recommendations don't come from my body of knowledge because I don't have one. I'm not medically trained. They come from her body, her physical body, and her energy field. And what it showed me was, you talked about looking at the whole picture. Her whole picture was she was having gut issues because of the stress. She was having sleep issues. There was a lot of things going on. Her vagus nerve was, it was like there was a lot to look at there in terms of how the body can heal this. And the main information for her at that time was this is emotionally based. So you want to look at it from that perspective. You want to take the time and process. And that was what her body said. 2 days later, she called me. She said, it's gone completely. It's as if it wasn't there. I said that information made all the difference. And she said, now I can process the emotions of this breakup, which she was having trouble with. All from information. That's it. From listening to her body, from querying her biofield, there it was.
A couple of things that really strike me from that story are one, the breadth of information, the layering of information, right? As it went deeper back to when she was 5 and that early trauma. Um, and also how that permission moment that you talked about earlier, for sure. And also how the awareness that the gut is involved and the nervous system is involved and these other organs or systems or experiences are all related to this really can guide someone with where they go, right? So many times people have symptoms that they think are not connected, which everything of course is, but I'm
Mhm.
really hearing that come forth in your story. The wrist was connected, right? That song, that this is connected to this bone, right?
I say
And
that
the
to my
wrist is
students.
connected.
The everything bone is connected to the everything bone.
Right, right. So, and not even just the bone, but the every experience is
Mhm.
connected to the every experience. So, I
Yeah.
mean, where someone could end up going to, an orthopedist and a gut person and a this and a that, even if it's in the alternative sphere, you'd be chasing all those things when really the root is something that might never be revealed in another way.
Yeah, very well said, Catherine. Root cause is one of those terms that is very popular to say now, but I don't see and from a conventional medicine perspective, sure, I get that, but it's still from that mechanistic allopathic perspective of the body that doesn't take into account the energy, the life history, what other systems are going. Everybody looks through that tunnel vision because they have to. That's the way they're trained. There's nothing wrong inherently with that except that you miss so much. That's what's wrong with it. And I really, my soapbox here is I want medical intuitives working directly with doctors and their patients. I want medical intuitives in the ER. I want them in clinics and hospitals. This will shift the paradigm of conventional medicine. I don't see how it couldn't. And we do have medical intuitives working in hospitals already. Nurses who are highly, highly intuitive may not have had training, but are certainly aware and cognizant, etc. So we want to make this we want to legitimize the field, I'll put it that way. And there's a lot to do for that.
A great deal, though there is more awareness and attention and acceptance of at least elements of it than there was certainly when you began, which is remarkable. I also know that you're involved in some research, if I understand correctly. And so tell us a little bit about what is being found through the research that's being done and what your role is in helping to make that happen.
Yeah, it's very important to have research, particularly on biofield practices. And there are more and more people who want to fund and study and legitimize biofield practices. Medical intuition, again, is not a treatment or a healing session, as a process, but it does need that legitimacy. So when I started my school, I'm like, all right, well, how do I want to? I teach wellness professionals from every walk, and so I know that, your average physician is going to need some data to, say, okay, well, this is legitimate enough for me to think about, right? And when I looked into the research on it, and I wrote about everything I could find in the book, by the way, there wasn't a lot. And the last the last study that was done, was like the late 90s and early 2000s. It's been over 20 years for anything really robust to have been done. All inconclusive, but all promising, what the scientists say. Well, this is really promising, which is great. We like to see that. But I realized that there really wasn't enough there. So I I intrepidly and sort of without knowing what I was, really getting myself into, I decided to start on my own study. Now, I don't come from a research background, but I thought, my students are hitting their marks. We get nothing but high a lot of evidence of anecdotal success. And that's not uncommon in medical intuition. So, like, can we study it? So, what we decided to do, and I work with some colleagues down in San Diego at UCSD, we put together a survey where we had a study, really a pilot study, where we had 5 of my graduates who were trained in a very specific method. We had 67 participants from the community, some of whom were from UCSD Medical Center patients. And we did sessions with them in a very controlled way, blinded, meaning no intake. We never do that anyway. No medical history. We don't do that anyway. And the practitioner's eyes are closed, so we don't have visual cues either. And we did these sessions, and we sent a rather detailed survey to the participants and said, how did they hit their marks? We received 94% accuracy in for the medical intuitives in location and evaluation of the primary health issue. 94%. That's pretty high. We received
I
90.
believe that's higher than the numbers I've read for actual medical evaluations.
Yes, yes, it is. And when the doctors read that, they went, we're not even getting that. Which was really fun. We also got 98% accuracy in description of life history that is probable or possible. Sometimes people don't remember everything, especially if we're seeing something from really young babyhood or even in the womb. They wouldn't have a memory of it. But if it seemed probable or possible, or if they understood it, then, that was part of that question. What do you think? And in some cases, they're like, oh, they nailed it. They nailed it. They nailed it. So what we got there was a 98% accuracy rate there in life history, which is phenomenal. We also saw 94% consistency in the participants' known diagnosis. So what we asked there was, do you actually have a diagnosis? Don't tell us what it is, but do you have it? And if you have one, was the medical intuitive consistent in the information they gave you about that? 94% consistency there. Now that is as close to empirical data as we could get in an exploratory study, but it was written up in the Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine, which is a peer-reviewed medical journal, and it represents the first study in over 20 years now that really has gotten to that level of data with medical intuition. And we've just started, Katherine. I'm so excited. I can tell you and your the audience here that we are hoping to launch a new study this year or early next year with a wonderful research organization that called IONS, which is Institute of Noetic Sciences, where we're developing a study where we bring medical intuitives, doctors, and patients together in the exam room, so the medical intuitive can work with the doctor, with the patient, to do exactly what we do to help the doctor get more data for themselves, more information, and let the patient be part of it. It's actually a very innovative model and kind of groundbreaking. So we're hoping that that goes.
That is so exciting. First, just the numbers and the consistency in what you are seeing in the study that you've already done is extraordinary and so exciting, actually, for people who are practicing medical intuition, or even, while it's different for people in the other sort of intuitive related fields, to have any kind of numerical validation or numerical support for what's going on is just, that really is pioneering. And
Yeah, thank you.
the idea of putting the medical practitioner and the client or patient and the medical intuitive together just feels extraordinary. The picture that comes to me is the true word of synergy, where the information and the potency and the possibility of what's in that room is so much greater than what it would be with any of those 3 people individually.
Well, we're hoping so. That model actually comes from an interview I did for the book with a wonderful integrative health doctor in New York who, when I reached out to the community and I said, okay, I'm writing this book, I want to present what this can offer to the to the public and to the healthcare industry, to everybody. She very generously allowed me to interview her and her medical intuitive, and this is her model. She brings her medical intuitive in when the patient obviously gives consent, and they all three work together. And I also interviewed some of her patients who said, I don't want to do medicine, and I would never do anything other than this. It made every bit of sense to the patient. It made sense to them. It helped the doctor get more accurate diagnoses. It helped the medical intuitive bring forth things that the doctor might not have known about, treatments or opportunities or even life history. I mean, it's phenomenal. And she's been helping us with the study too. It's just been really great.
That's extraordinary, and I love how things are coming together to support what you're doing as well. That's so exciting and so beautiful, and I'm sure our readers will want to follow along with you. In talking about our readers, a lot of our readers at Energy Magazine are practitioners, and if not, they're certainly interested in all of these types of things. I know in your book, you give some examples of exercises to begin tuning into intuition or to begin to sort of refine that a little bit. Would you be willing to share an exercise with us today?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So the the place to start, in my opinion, with developing intuition is something I call energy hygiene, which means we need to be very aware of our own energetic state. And, intuitives tend to either be, not either, but tend to a lot of times be like sponges, they just pick up everything, and it can be really overwhelming for people. So we start with energy hygiene so that people get a sense of where is my energy right now? How can I modulate it myself? How can I work with it myself so that I don't feel overwhelmed or, exhausted or whatever's going on for me? So they're very, very simple. There's a whole chapter in the book about them. And there's also information on the website in our guided meditation series. There's a whole series called Energy Essentials. And they're designed for us to not only work with our own energy, but also our physical body and get that. What, everybody talks about mind body connection. Well, this is what we do, connect that mind and that body, right? So the first thing I suggest everybody learn is a skill called grounding. Very simple. I'm sure most people listening to this know a little bit about grounding or have used it or use it every day. I use it every day. You ground from the soles of your feet and just with your eyes closed, gently imagine. I like the visual of roots. So we can imagine from the soles of our feet, roots growing down into the ground, all the way down as far as we want them to grow. Keep them going. You can grow them all the way down into the center of the earth, or you can, stop about 10 or 20 feet down, whatever feels good for you. What that grounding process does, and use your imagination for this, by the way, what that grounding process does is it connects you, it creates a connection between your physical body and the earth. Very important. There's all kinds of ways to ground. You can just go outside and stick your feet in the grass. That's okay too. But if you want to use that visual, intuitive sense, try that. The second one I'll give you, and there's much more on the website and in the book, is what I call shielding, which is a really important technique, particularly for highly intuitive people. And what that means is that you create what I call a buffer around your body. So again, with your eyes closed, you can imagine a nice thick buffer of any kind of material you want. Maybe it looks like cotton balls or clouds or anything. And what that buffer does is it will absorb or repel anything in your world here, your space that is unwanted, right? You don't want that in your energy. So you keep that buffer up, you keep yourself grounded, and there are many more techniques, but these are the basics that really help us understand how to modulate and work with our own energy.
And also, it sounds like to be a clean vessel or a clean recipient for the information that comes through as well, yeah?
What it does is it increases something that I call neutrality. And neutrality is one of the key skills that people learn in my program. You have to, because otherwise you're going to feel bombarded by all of this data and information that you're seeing. We need very important practitioner skills here. And let me just say this. Oh, sorry.
You go ahead, go ahead.
What I was going to say is these skills are also taught in a workshop called Medical Intuition for Healing. That workshop is for everyone, and it really picks up where the book like stops where people have an opportunity to really practice a lot of skills with their energy and learn how to listen to their bodies and query their bodies so that they can learn medical intuition for themselves, which is hugely important.
If I can come to another sort of nitty gritty practitioner kind of geeking out sort of question, um, one of the things that actually there are two questions here. One of the things I have noticed in what you've said is, and actually read about your work, is that your approach is a little different than what we often see, which is, if it looks like this, then it must be this. And even in the example that you gave, the grief and heartbreak from that previous relationship breakup was in her wrist, right? Where
Mhm.
so typically, people say, oh, grief is the lungs or, whatever,
Or a chakra or something like
right?
that.
And
It was
so,
actually in
so
her wrist. Yeah.
I'm hearing you uh, not holding to any particular system there, and 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 that there's more fluidity in that interpretation. Can you tell us a little more about where you are with that in your system?
Yeah, that goes back to the no bias allowed, meaning, you know, there are reasons to have guidelines for things, and I appreciate that out there, And is grief held in the lungs? Sure. Can it also be held in the knee? Of course, right? Or the wrist or somewhere else? Yes. So what these guidelines are literally are guidelines. They're not hard lines, right? And that's the difference between the this equals that mentality or perspective or process and the medical intuitive process where I never know what I'm going to see until I look, right? And learning that process is critical for not, let me put it this way. If we use an algorithm, which is conventional medicine in a nutshell, where if it's this, it must be that, if it's that, it must be this, like a Venn diagram, right? And that is what is, if I can be so bold, I think it's what is really hurt conventional medicine and why. Yes, I don't want to speak out of turn here, but it looks to me like that is very, very, very limiting. And I know there are doctors that are speaking out about this. This is not the way to practice medicine, they say. We want more of the art of medicine. And when physicians come through my program, that's the feedback. They say, "Oh, this is the missing piece. This is the art of health." And listening to the body, talking to the body, hearing from the body, all of these things really inform their own body of knowledge. But we can't come from our body of knowledge to begin with, because then we miss everything, right? That's the difference.
We're reinforcing our own thinking rather than really
Biases.
even tuning into what's actually going on and the uniqueness of each person who's showing up.
Yeah. So when I teach, again, physicians and nurses and those who have chiropractors and acupuncturists have this really deep and profound and important body of knowledge, the learning curve for them is let's leave that at the door here, at least for this process. And after you get all that, then you can apply your body of knowledge to that. And that's where it really works. That's why we want to see this integrated into healthcare.
I love that distinction of the medical intuition essentially preceding,
Mhm.
right? Not negating any field of knowledge or anything like that, but simply preceding it to provide a basis for whatever type of approach or treatment or care might follow. That's a beautiful place for it.
Yes, that's why I call it a foundational skill and why it applies to any kind of healthcare.
If I could ask one more nitty gritty question,
Yes,
I hear
please.
you talking about seeing, and you named that earlier. You really use the clairvoyance element, the seeing element, rather than the feeling or whatever else. Is there a place for those other clairs, if you will, or is this really pretty much a visual approach?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, medical intuitives have their methods across the board, and everybody has their own thing. In my program, what I've found in my own practice, that training myself very highly in the intuitive visual sense actually gave me what I was hoping to find, which is I want to see how your heart is pumping. I want to see how that liver is detoxifying. I want to see, and when I can see it, then I can describe it. And if I can describe it, then there's information not only for the client, but for their practitioner as well. So I found that the visual sense was the one I really wanted to cultivate in this work. Now, I know there's medical intuitives that are very emotionally based, and they're clairsentient, they feel it all. And I will say that just now, this is only my perspective and opinion. I respect all versions, right? But how I train people is in that visual sense. And um, there's nothing wrong with any of the other parts, but I find it the most effective. And frankly, I think it's why my graduates are getting these very, very high accuracy numbers, because we are really literally looking into the detail here. And that information is also really useful for clients because, you know, you can describe it, you can imagine it in your own mind's eye, right? And you can say it again to somebody. You can impart that information. Very helpful for doctors because they can get it. They know what the anatomy looks like. They can get a visual sense too. It's extremely helpful.
And you find, it sounds, that people can be trained with the visual. I know my intuitive channel is normally not the visual. I always wished it was, but it isn't. But you find that that's trainable for people, yes?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And but here's the thing, uh, if you have an imagination and you can close your eyes and imagine your loved one or your pet or your pocketbook or something, like if you can just imagine something in your mind's eye, then that is what I would consider the basic building blocks of clairvoyance. And it takes you need to develop it. One of the things I also say, because you're right, Catherine, most natural intuitives are clairsentient, clairaudient, claircognizant. They're hearing, they're knowing, they're feeling, and I am all of those things too. When I'm working in medical intuition, I don't use any of those. I use visual. And that's a tool. It's a skill. It's not a tool, it's a skill. That is very much like if I wanted to learn Italian, right? To speak Italian. I wouldn't just castigate myself for not knowing how to speak Italian, right? I wouldn't go, oh, you can never learn, People think that way about clairvoyance. I'm like, what are you talking about? It's a skill. Of course you can develop it. So what would you do? You would find a teacher, you would find a program, you would put yourself in an educational, immersive environment, and then you go to Italy, and all of that is about how we learn things. But we have so much stigma in our society about intuition without, even breaking it down into its component parts. Where's intuition school? Kids aren't taught this. They're shushed. They're thwarted. Don't talk about it, right? So we don't have an understanding that this is a learnable, teachable skill, and that it has not just myriad uses, not only medical intuition, but intuitives in business, intuitives in research, intuitives in, God, you name it, it just goes on. And these are wonderful skills to cultivate.
I'm so excited. I really am feeling your enthusiasm also, and that is so potent. And I want to bring it back, perhaps as we close, uh, to a couple points that come from this enthusiasm. And I know you focus a lot with medical practitioners, and I know the past couple of years with COVID, you've been really focused on helping these practitioners look after themselves
Mm-hmm.
with the particular burdens and strains that have been placed on them. And I really feel the desire for you to get this out there, the desire to share, and the desire to be able to help more people with this. I'd love to know a little about what's moved you to want to take this out, right? To really bring this to such a broad group of people.
The
What your
value.
mission is really, I
Yeah, no, the value of it. I'll share a little story here that really brought this home to me and made me understand that this is needed in healthcare. It's actually a gap in healthcare. And this briefly was a client early in my career, where she was a young woman. I live here in Los Angeles. She was an aspiring actress, beautiful lovely ingenue. And she came to my practice because she had sort of mid-back pain that wasn't going away, and it was very crippling pain. And she'd been to every kidney specialist in the city, and no one could see there was anything wrong with her. So they gave her antidepressants because she was not coping very well, and opioids because she was obviously in pain, even though they couldn't find the cause. And she came to my office, and I sat her down. I looked at, like, within a couple of minutes, what I saw was a little crystallized shard that had been formed in the kidney and moved out of the kidney and embedded itself right at the top of the ureter tube, and it wasn't budging. Now, this little crystallization was tiny. I mean, almost microscopic. It was too small for the technology at the time to register it. So they said there's nothing there. But there it was, and she certainly could feel it. And so this was the dialogue with the body. Okay, what do you need, kidney? What do you want? How do we flush this out? Does she need to drink gallons and gallons of water? What's going on? And it very clearly showed me, and actually stated, go see a surgeon. She needs to see a surgeon. And so what my job is to impart that to the client. So I drew her a picture of the kidney and where the little bugger was, and go find yourself a specialist, a surgeon who really specializes in this kind of thing, who can take a look and get you your help. She left my practice. That was it. I didn't find out what happened for her until 2 years later. And what happened was she did finally find a surgeon who was willing to listen and did do an exploratory, did whatever they needed to do, remove the kidney stone. She was out of pain finally. However, she was so addicted to the opioids by that point that she died of an overdose, right? And that was my reaction. And anyone who hears the story would have the same. It was tragic, heartbreaking. And here's the thing, never should have happened. Never, right? If her doctors had had a qualified medical intuitive to consult with, would she be alive today? And I would think the answer is yes. And that experience, I mean, I get goosebumps when I talk about it. It's emotional when I talk about it. This is what we want. You should know that medical error, and I'm not faulting the doctors for this, their equipment wasn't there, right? And I don't fault doctors for medical error necessarily, because they only can see with what they have to use. But medical error pre-COVID was the third leading cause of death in this country after heart disease and cancer. That is an astounding figure. COVID took its place over the last few years, and now medical error is number 4, but that will change again. This, from a medical intuitive perspective, is not only unnecessary, is a tragic number. So we want to mitigate that. This is where you can see my passion here. This is why it needs to be in medicine, because and the doctors, when I speak at conferences, they get it loud and clear.
It's exciting to hear that there's an openness to that among people in the medical field. It's easy to sort of discount, or just say, oh, they wouldn't want to listen. But I can only imagine that when they see something like with the client you just described, their hearts are broken too. Nobody wants that to happen. And so they probably also are looking for what's a better way. What else can we do?
And medical intuition has, and we haven't even touched on the fact that we see connections, that we see potential opportunities that may be in the planning stage, that haven't actually come out to fruition. I mean, it's very exciting that we can see things ahead of the game, and that's very common for medical intuitives. So honestly, I feel like we're an untapped resource at this point, and we really want to be integrated. And I'll just say, because I know we're wrapping up here, is that one of the things that myself and some of my colleagues, medical intuitive colleagues of all different kinds, have put together, and we just launched this now, is the National Organization for Medical Intuition, NOMI. And that's at nomimedicalintuition.org. We're a nonprofit, and our goal is to bring this information into healthcare, to educate, to bring awareness to it, and to help the professional medical intuitives out there, look at standards of practice, ethical conduct, things like this, so we can really raise the whole field.
Wendie, I am absolutely blown away by all that you have shared. from the deep, deep understanding of the medical intuition, the practices that you have cultivated in yourself and taught to so many people and are really spreading further and further out in the world, all the way to an organization that now supports the medical intuitives and helps to professionalize and move that forward in the world. The research you're doing, the whole breadth of it, I'm so impressed and so honored that our energy medicine and energy magazine community can listen to you and learn more about this. It's your heart and your mind, your whole self is clearly very devoted to this, and it really, I can feel it, and it's an honor. Your presence is really, really full in it.
Katherine, thank you. That is a lovely acknowledgement. I truly, truly appreciate it. And I know this is a field that has been really gone understood, for decades, for centuries, really, and it's time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Wendie. To all of our Energy Magazine audience and readers, thank you for joining us. You'll have information about Wendie's classes and website and things in the notes. And Wendie, I hope we get the opportunity to speak with you again.
Thank you, Katherine.
Thank you, everyone.